was amazing. And we saw all the great that it was able to do. But one of the problems with packbot is it's heavy. Packbot weighs around 50 or 60 pounds depending on the payload. And if you're trekking through the desert in Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, that's a heavy robot. And the soldiers told us that. To a word, they came back every time and said, we love this robot, does the task, but the robot's too heavy. Being engineers, of course, the answer was the robot, as we learned, had a center of gravity. It needs to do certain things. The robot is designed as such. And that was great until one of our engineers went over and actually participated in boot camp and worked with the soldiers. And those soldiers were smart. On day one, they said, you know what? We're going for a hike, but you carry the robot. Our engineer put the robot on. They began their hike through the desert. They didn't get very far. Our engineer called back to iRobot. The robot's too heavy. So we listened to our user, as we've done all through time, and we redesigned it. We brought out a robot that was similar to this, called Sugv. And Sugv was able to be a much lighter, more agile robot. Okay, the robot does much of the same things. Some versions have a gripper, some didn't. But what made it unique is that all of the controls were inside a backpack. So you could wear the backpack, including the robot, and actually control it with a game controller, very easy to use. And we even included a set of heads-up glasses. And so the glasses enable the user to see what the robot saw, but also keep a heads-up vision out of the other eye. But this robot is somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 35 pounds and makes it a much more agile, quick robot for use in that situation. The robot that you see over here has evolved through our time. It actually, when it was first brought out, was named Neo Mover. Later it got renamed to Warrior, and now it's called Cobra. This is a 500-pound robot, can lift about 300 with the arm. The arm extends to about 12 feet. We can use this arm to tow a truck, rip a car door off, and do all sorts of really heavy tasks that we don't want a person to do, but a robot is well suited for. This robot came into our history in the timeline right around when the Fukushima incident happened in Japan. There was a giant tsunami and an earthquake, and the nuclear plant that they had there eventually was hit by the tsunami and began what we call a meltdown. You can't send anybody into a melting nuclear reactor, but they needed to shut down that plant. And the way that eventually happened was that we were able to send the robot, both Cobra and the packbot, over to Japan, train their workers how to use it, and send the robot inside. Because the robot's able to use a gripper, because the robot has cameras, it could manipulate through doorways, it could climb stairs. These are stair climbing robots, and eventually was able to shut that plant down. And the Japanese government told us it would not have been possible without the use of these robots. So these are very important to our history and have done some really exciting work for us. Sometimes we get asked, what's it like to work at iRobot, and what does it mean as an employee to see your robots out in the field, into the world, and being used? In the case of the very first robot to come back from Iraq, having been blown up by an IED, our employees laid all the pieces out on a table so they could see it, and you might think that they were upset that the robot was obviously demolished, but that's not why the employees were actually crying when they saw this. It was the realization that there were soldiers that were alive today because of this robot. Because of the work they had done, people were able to just send us these parts. We can recreate the robot. Recreating a robot's easy. You can't recreate a human life. And so that day when we saw what had happened, we realized that we were saving lives with our robots. And we realized the importance of the work that we do. And it let every employee want to do that work more and want to continue on that path. One of the other robots in our legacy when we were doing defense and security is the first look robot. Obviously, we built a lot of prototypes first, and you can see some of them over there. Some are 3D printed. We started making a lot of use of 3D printing technology, but eventually the first look came out as a small 5-pound throwable robot. So the robot has a flexible antenna. It has flippers that allow it to get up over an obstacle or right itself if it flips over. And when we first brought it out, we developed our own controller. The first look was a direct response to our users. The packbot was great, the Sugv was great, the Cobra was doing all the work it needed, but they needed it to get into small, tight spaces. Or they were finding that a lot of times they could get to an incident and they needed to see what was on the other side of a wall. And so having a throwable robot in their arsenal let them see into those spaces and investigate without putting themselves into harm's way. So the robot has cameras on all 4 sides, and the controller allowed them to see that video feed. However, as we developed, we were beginning to do a little bit more with GPS, with mapping on robots, and bringing the robots over to a tablet controller. So First Look was one of our first to actually use a tablet as a controller and allow the user to draw with their finger on the tablet where they wanted the robot to go, or even drop a point and send the robot to that point. First Look had another amazing use as it was being worked on for mesh networking. Because we needed sometimes to extend the range of the communication with the robot, packbot could carry the robot out, drop it in the location, and almost use it like a hotspot. And so that extended the range of where we could communicate with our robots. So I'm sitting in an older project at iRobot called the R-Gator. R-Gator was a partnership with John Deere. We don't build Jeeps, but they do. And the idea was to make basically a smart Jeep. For our troops, it became really handy for carrying gear, for bringing things into different locations, but it also had a really great technology to follow a person. And so let's say the soldiers were marching, the Jeep could be following along with their gear and help them bring things from place to place. The other fascinating thing about this Jeep is it was our first inspiration for mapping technology. The Jeep is using GPS to know the locations that it needs to get to and enabling all of that with a map. Now, the Jeep could be driven just like a normal Jeep, but the other really fun thing is you could put the Jeep into an autopilot mode, and that's really where it became a robot. The Jeep also could be driven with a typical game controller and that similar heads-up glasses to our Sugv, and so the soldiers were able to use it, carry their gear, bring things, potentially even use it in rescue missions, and have a very essential piece of their arsenal.